Welcome to the World Story 22 channel, a channel that always provides info about the history of the nations of the world. On this auspicious occasion, Channel World Story 22 will discuss the history of the early arrival of the Dutch to Indonesia. They came to Indonesia first of all actually just trade. Then how did the Dutch finally control Indonesia and colonize the Indonesian nation? What do the Dutch want for the Indonesian people? Before proceeding to the discussion, I remind you first, for those of you who have not subscribed to this channel, please subscribe to this channel first, so that you don't miss out on the historical news of countries around the world. The history of the arrival of the Dutch to Indonesia was originally motivated by the aim of looking for spices. Dutch ships first entered Indonesian archipelago waters in 1596 AD, decades after the arrival of the Portuguese and Spanish. Like the last two European nations, the purpose of the arrival of Dutch ships to the archipelago was originally to look for spices. The Dutch search for spices was inseparable from the domination of Spain and Portugal, the two largest empires of mainland Europe at that time. Previously, the Dutch received spice supplies from Lisbon, the Portuguese capital. However, since Spain took control of the Dutch territory, the Orange country was prohibited from receiving spice supplies from the Portuguese. In fact, according to the historian M.C. Ricklefs in the book Modern Indonesian History 1200-2004, spices were a very important raw material for European civilization in the 20th century-15. By Europeans, spices are used as ingredients for medicines, perfumes, cooking spices, religious ritual tools, and most importantly food preservatives. If not, the cattle will die from the cold. The meat from the mass slaughter had to be preserved to meet the needs during the winter, and spices were needed for that. Therefore, the Dutch then looked for other ways to get supplies of spices. The Dutch then began exploring the oceans. Only based on that goal. Quoting the book Class 9 History of Indonesia published by the Ministry of Education and Culture. Like other European nations, the voyages of Dutch sailors to various parts of the world were driven by several political events and technological developments in the 15th century. Ocean exploration by Europeans was carried out at least because of two important political events. Namely the defeat of European Catholic kingdoms in the Crusades and the fall of Constantinople to the Ottoman Turks. The Crusades devastated European and Asian trade routes because they took place in border of the two continents. In addition to trade routes, the economic situation of European kingdoms also worsened. Their cash shrank drastically due to the high cost of war. 2 centuries after the Crusades ended, the city of Constantinople, now Istanbul, fell into the hands of the Ottoman Empire. This was bad news for the kingdoms in Europe because the city became an important point of intercontinental trade routes, Europe and Asia. Since Constantinople was controlled by the Ottoman Turks, European traders were prohibited from coming to the city to transact with merchants, traders from Asia. The Mediterranean Sea at that time was also controlled by the Ottoman Turks, so that for European traders there was almost no opportunity to interact with suppliers of goods from the Far East. The science of geography and shipping technology began to progress rapidly in Europe. Science and shipping technology which developed rapidly after the Crusades made European nations try to find other trade routes by sea. They also desire to discover a new world on lands that are still mysterious to European nations, especially the spice-producing islands. Also used as a means of spreading the mission of Catholicism and Christianity. Because of this, the term gold, glory, and gospel, 3G, was born, which describes the shipping spirit of European explorers at that time. The history of the entry of the Dutch nation. The Dutch explorers first entered the archipelago in 1595 with 4 ships, 64 cannons, and 249 crew commanded by Cornelis de Houtman. 4 Dutch ships led by Cornelis de Houtman arrived in the waters of Banten on June 27, 1596, exactly today 422 years ago. Before lifting anchor from Amsterdam, Cornelis got information that in the Far East, there is an archipelago that produces spices. Nusantara. On that day, the Dutch found Banten, which is actually only a small part of the spice archipelago. Most tempting in the world. The practice of Dutch colonialism in the archipelago immediately began, and Cornelis de Houtman was the pioneer. From Banten, this group continued its journey eastward along the north coast of Java to Bali. Cornelis became one of the most influential people, in addition to successfully obtaining information from Portugal, including having been arrested and imprisoned by the authorities there. He also contributed funds amounting to 300,000 guilders for the preparation of the voyage, as expressed by Peter Fitzsimmons, 2012, in a book entitled Batavia. Cornelis de Houtman is known as the captain of a ship with bad habits. His arrival was welcomed by the people of the archipelago with open arms. However, his actions turned the relationship into enmity and war. Nevertheless, de Houtman's group managed to return to the Netherlands in 1597 with many chests full of spices. The first voyage of the Dutch to find spices in the archipelago was then considered a success. The voyages made after the return of de Houtman's entourage are known as the wild vaart, irregular voyages. The ships are not government ships, but belong to Dutch private companies. One of the groups in the second wave of sailing was led by Jacob van Neck. Unlike de Houtman, Van Neck was more cautious and did not try to fight the local rulers of the archipelago. Van Neck's success in reaching the Moluccas made him a big profit when he returned to the Netherlands. In 1601, a wave of voyages to the archipelago returned from the Netherlands. A total of 14 ships participated in this third wave of voyages. The voyage network was then followed by the move of the Dutch to monopolize the spice trade in a number of areas of the archipelago. Historian M.C. Ricklefs mentions the success of the Dutch in monopolizing the spice trade in the archipelago because they learned from the mistakes of the Portuguese. In fact, both Spain and Portugal tried to hide the existence of the Indonesian archipelago from other nations in Europe. However, there were crew members from the Netherlands on board the Portuguese ships that were exploring. It was these people who made detailed notes on the intricacies of the strategy, advantages and disadvantages of the Portuguese voyages. 3 waves of Dutch voyages to the archipelago resulted in several trading companies competing with each other in the archipelago. As a result, the profits of the spice trade in the European market were reduced. To overcome the impact of this competition, in 1602, Vereniging de Oost-Indische Compagnie, VOC, was formed as the Dutch trade union. Through the VOC, private trading companies united and eliminated competition among Dutch traders. The establishment of the VOC was also a milestone in Dutch domination in the archipelago. After successfully monopolizing the spice trade, controlling Batavia and parts of Java, and controlling local kings, the VOC became the initial representative of Dutch colonialism in the archipelago.